Hi, I'm Mark the Family Woodworker. This week my daughter and her hubby make a design and build request for a mid-century modern dining table, but in a totally non-traditional color. Woodshop videos normally provide an opportunity to babble on about wood varieties or detailed cut dimensions or how cool you think your new tool might be. But what if you're a hobby woodworker just trying to make awesome stuff for your own family? Today we're going to tackle this project without any formal plans and show you the creative steps we took to make something truly beefy and wicked cool. This whole thing started when my daughter asked if I could help build them a new dining table, something a little better than cheesy store-bought veneer-covered particle board. She thought that her kitchen dining space would be able to support a tabletop size about 40 by 60 inches, probably at a common kitchen table leg height of 29 inches, and then we also talked about removing all the sharp corners and edges to help protect our new granddaughter's noggin. Oh, and she wanted it to be black. Stained black? One good thing about the table dimensions she picked is that I could use standard 8-foot lumber lengths, cut the longer tabletop boards down to size, and still have enough left over for the legs. The challenge is in finding thicker lumber for a project like this. If you skip the overpriced home centers, sometimes smaller local lumber yards will carry thicker hardwood stock, pre-sanded and ready for use. If you do have a table saw and a surface planer though, you can start with rough sawn lumber and do the final millwork yourself, saving a ton of money. All of the rough sawn, kiln dried white ash lumber you see in this video was purchased for around $130 from a local sawmill. These little hidden hardwood suppliers are out there, you just need to ask around. Prepping all that rough sawn lumber through the surface planer and the table saw becomes a bit repetitive and robotic, but that also carries with it its own positive energy. You know you're saving money by doing some of this cleanup work yourself, and you can monitor the results, cutting around the parts you don't want and picking out the best surfaces for your tabletop. The slightly more flawed and knotty pieces I'll use for the legs. Trimming your own lumber also means you get to play a little indoor basketball with the cut-off pieces. The next morning was sunny and breezy, and two of my garden windmill projects were having some fun in the wind, but it was time to get back down to the shop. My stacked up longboards were ready to be glued into a table slab, but I really needed to first address the leg problem. I sent my daughter a few sample pictures of leg styles, and she gravitated towards pictures B and C, possibly making a tapered leg with a curved inner corner. I really didn't know yet how to make that style of leg and then have it hold the weight of the table. I started by drawing up a template on some scrap plywood, and I knew I wanted the leg to taper down to the floor and that the upper transition to the apron needed to be curved. I played around with a couple of rough angles off from 90 degrees and found a 10-degree rake seemed to look best. I brought a 5-gallon bucket to the party to help me shape that inner curve. Hey, sometimes you solve problems with the stuff laying around the shop. I also double-checked the 10-degree angle against the flat top of the leg apron, and I knew I had a good template. One of the other challenges with this design was not knowing where to position the legs under the table. I thought that the angled leg should probably hit the floor no further out than the outer edge of the table, and a plumb bob helped me figure out that offset. It looks like I'll be pulling in the upper leg framing into the table by 5 inches on each side. I still didn't know yet how I would mount the legs securely under the table, but I felt good enough about the basic design to start marking up and cutting those basic leg shapes. Though my lumber was 1.5 inches thick, I was concerned about the amount of wood actually sitting on the floor supporting the weight of the table. I had tapered the legs after all, and the wood was relatively thin on the bottom near the floor. The leg profile looked really great, but I thought I might need some more beef on the leg. Somewhere along the way I chose to add another inch to the thickness of the leg, where I would then glue those two leg cutouts together. The front profile of the leg would stay the same, looking tapered and thin from the long side of the table, but the thickness from the end view of the leg would be up to 2.5 inches thick. This was another production line activity, cutting out 8 leg blanks on the bandsaw and then trimming them up on the router. But the plywood template served as a guide for the router bits so that each leg was cut exactly the same. I screwed in the plywood template on what would be the inner side of each leg so that any screw holes would be inside the glued wood sandwich. While getting the legs finished and then glued and clamped together, I was back to the problem of how to securely attach those legs to the bottom of the table and not have them splay out from the table weight. I couldn't simply use long screws to attach the leg, but I also didn't want to build some hidden massive anchoring system. The legs would also need to come to parts so that it could be delivered in our little SUV. And then I remembered a joinery tip that I read about in an old issue of Fine Woodworking magazine, namely using threaded steel rod and epoxy for strong leg joints under lateral stresses. I even used that joinery for an original and weird leg design on a table that should have no business holding up the weight of a 6'5", 280-pound family woodworker. But those joints are strong. If I can anchor a strong front apron to the leg with a steel rod and epoxy, that might be the best solution. Building those apron assemblies was the next assignment. With a little apprehension about the stability of the final design, after all, I really didn't know how it would all turn out, I fell back into production mode, making apron pieces for the long and short sides of the table. Each apron piece would be in the shape of the letter L, with more dowels than necessary holding them together. The visible front of the apron trim would be 2.5 inches wide, facing down from the underside of the table, and then matching up to the width of the wood at the top of each leg. The curve at the top of the leg would feed into the apron visually seamlessly. I also made the apron pieces about 1 inch thick so that I could support the bolting of the apron to the underside of the table using recessed threaded brass inserts. With most of the underside table parts fabricated, all the wooden parts anyway, it was finally time to do that thing that makes a table a table. The planks that had been sitting patiently on the floor were brought back up to the workbench to enjoy one more brief moment of independence before they were forever joined together in glued up tabletop matrimony. I also noticed that the wood had moved a little since my surface planing and edge work was done more than a week before, and that can be quite normal as you relieve some internal wood grain stresses by cutting and thickness planing it. But those changes in the wood made it a little difficult to line up the edges for gluing. I figured by adding a few hardwood dowels on each length would help bring those pieces together and line them up. I also could have run them all through the planer again and jointed the edges again, but I didn't want to remove any more thickness from the tabletop. I was really trying to keep it at 5/4 in finished thickness, or 1.25 inches overall. To make sure the glue stayed wet during assembly, I chose to do the glue up in 2 separate pieces and then bring those 2 tops together after each of them was dry. After the full top was done, small cracks were filled in with epoxy, and even though the planks had lined up pretty well, I still had some hand plane work to do to remove a few high spots. The ends of the tabletop were trimmed, and I'm amazed, really amazed, at the strength of this Tight Bond 3 wood glue. It is the only thing holding these little cut edges together. I also remembered my custom order instructions and removed all the sharp corners to give my new granddaughter a break if she ever accidentally bumped her head while running around the kitchen. In keeping with the theme of no sharp corners, I softened the edges of the legs and the perimeter of the tabletop and then rounded over all those 90-degree corners before final sanding. I realized that the rounding of the table edges was a practical choice given the little ones that would eventually be running around my daughter's house, but I kind of like how all the curves on the legs and the top come together to form one consistent style. It really looks cool and fits the design look of mid-century modern furniture pretty well. A happy accident? I don't know, but it looks pretty awesome. It was finally time for the risky part of the construction, and I'll try not to get too geeky here. I knew that the stress on the leg would come from that 10-degree angle of the leg down to the floor. The weight would naturally want to push those legs out towards the ends unless I could anchor them firmly against the long side of the table. That's where the steel rods and epoxy will come into play. While the end apron pieces were doweled into the legs with glue, the long side aprons were fitted with 3 steel rods and epoxy, permanently attaching the apron to the leg. One of my many challenges was in drilling consistent holes for the hardwood dowels and then also the steel rods to hold the legs and apron pieces together. So making these simple little drill jigs blocked to fit the side of the apron really helped me to drill straight and consistent holes for those dowels. The apron at the ends of the table were held together with thicker oak dowels and then clamped up to dry. The higher stress joint would be the leg attached to the long side of the table, and that's where I used those steel rods and epoxy to hold the apron to the leg. To make the legs more portable, the long side apron was cut in half, and they'll join in the middle once bolted to the underside of the table. I still need to make a trim cap for that middle joint, but I'll need all the glue and epoxy to fully cure first. Once all the glue joints were solid, I laid out the leg assemblies on the underside of the table, centering them before laying out the bolt pattern on those apron pieces. Once more, I used a marked up drill jig made out of plywood to help me make consistent holes, drilled straight and at the right depth to accept those easy lock threaded brass inserts. If I did my math right, an 1.5 inch long quarter 20 bolt would be just about right for attaching those aprons to the tabletop. Those inserts were installed and the newly prototyped table construction was done. With the bolts laid out and enough play for wood expansion, it was our first view of the table on the floor. It actually feels like a tank, no wobble or concern at all. The white ash wood grain actually looks pretty awesome too on the table, and the thought of using a stain, any kind of stain, kind of bugged me as much as it bugs Nick Offerman.
I hate stain.
But I made one more plea with my daughter.
Hello?
Hey, how's my favorite oldest daughter and, my favorite granddaughter? I've been working with Matt. Matt's going to help me with the finishing, but I'm almost done with the construction, and I wanted to know if you had any second thoughts about the finish.
Nope, I still want it black.
Black like, ebony black, or?
Nope, black. Black like my soul.
Black like your soul. Black it is. So with some final sanding prep, a lot of finish sanding actually, it was time to honor the customer's wishes. With the polyurethane fully hardened on the top, I flipped it over to add our shop logo to the bottom, and then brought the table upstairs to see how it looked fully assembled. The bolts really do help solidify the whole leg structure, and it sits firmly on the floor. No leg wobble at all. My daughter has similar colored flooring in her home, and I think the table will look pretty awesome given her kitchen cabinets are black and her countertops are black quartz. Though I've used this true black stain on things like desk legs and other trim projects, I'm not sure I would ever pick it for the centerpiece table like in a dining room. But the dark stain actually helps accentuate that wood grain. That sounds counterintuitive, but you can see the natural figure in the wood through the black satin finish. This was a ton of work, and the project was filled with a lot of unknowns, but I really dig the result. It looks like we're set for delivery sometime next week. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. We hope you'll honor us with a thumbs up on the video and perhaps subscribe to our channel too. All of our videos are free to watch, no memberships required, so thanks very much for stopping by. Take care.